Well, thank you, Aviv. That's a phenomenal sweep of what I perceive to be strands that can can weave a strong mixing metaphors container for collective exploration. And I'm eager to put these into practice myself. I'm also really curious then to zoom in or focus in, and maybe it's not going deep so much as it is going well, you said vertical before, but really looking up close at maybe an hour or so, some portion of the 3 days, which maybe in microcosm gives us a sense of the whole as well.
Well, there was a delicious inquiry that came my way that centered on the idea of leading from the unconscious, which was a response to something that a recording that I shared earlier before the event with the participants of the event. And the question simply stated and offered, I'm paraphrasing more or less word for word though, it said that the unconscious in us is sometimes more conscious than consciousness. This being the case, there is a curiosity and wonder about when the unconscious is leading the way. Because I proposed we have entered time where increasingly, when we can unleash leading from the unconscious, extraordinarily larger new permissions become possible. And so the question then offered or asked, is it suggesting that it's when we find ourselves doing something we didn't plan or didn't reason, or having arrived somewhere and don't know how we got there? Is that the kind of unconscious or unconsciousness that I was speaking of? And it followed with another question where she asked, my question is therefore, how do we let or encourage the unconsciousness to lead the way, and how do we discover it for ourselves? So that was the question. Sometimes you get questions that you'd actually pay somebody to configure, but it's better that you didn't pay for it because it came from an authentic need. And it had that catalytic nature. And so there was a two-part response that perhaps I can share with you. The first part was more with, is it indeed like you travel somewhere and you discover that you were where you didn't know how you got there? And to which I said, not quite. There is something about it that is a bit like that, but not quite. And I was caused to look to find language to articulate something that I've never articulated for myself before. And so this is going to be just a second time I talk about it, and the language is still being developed. We may very well need to update it. And so I'm going to bring it actually on a slide, because just this morning I put a little bit of it on the slide. There was one slide that was generated quickly during the weekend. So I'm now sharing this. And the question we selected for this in-depth hour that emerged on yesterday, actually, midday, centered on the inquiry of mapping the strategies and the technologies of working with different levels of the unconscious. The first thing that occurred to me was the need to make the distinction between what I called an absent unconscious and a present or a presence-full unconscious. And the way those emerged in the moment were in the sense that an absent unconscious is where you find yourself when you're absent from yourself, when you're absent from the sense of what you're about, when you're absent from the sense of being generative about what is meaningful for you, about what you care about. So you are literally floating in the district rudderless, with no direction, with no aim, and you therefore can be exposed or can be influenced by anything that will show up in the district. Where a present unconscious is the unconscious that is allowed when you have cultivated a specific interest, a specific inquiry, specific committed dedication, whether of a devotional nature or developmental nature or a business nature or entrepreneurial nature or any of the above. And so that's how I frame them in the first place. Absent unconscious receives and is influenced by anything floating in the district. A present or a presence-full unconscious seeds and cultivates a purposeful inquiry search. So then I thought about it and I said, yeah, and we developed it a lot more over the weekend, but this morning I actually added 2 more layers to this because I recognized that there is the general absent unconscious, but then there is really the subconscious, where you'd say that is the part of the unconscious that loads with what is suppressed and is disowned. So when we talk about leading from the unconscious, we are not talking about letting that part lead. That part will need to be facilitated and helped in a different way. But I recognize that what I was actually proposing in leading from the unconscious was using the present or presence-full unconscious as a way to tap or access or source the universal unconsciousness and the intelligence streams that are forever available. And those are realms that connects higher sources and bring enhancement and flow states. This is not a linear framework or not a linear loom, because if you take the example of Mozart in the way he is depicted in the movie Amadeus, obviously, when he was in his element, when he was in his connecting to the unconscious that will allow him to compose angelic music, he became indeed a conduit for the most profound realms of music. But when he was not there, he was a disaster. He was a mess. And I propose that we often find people who became thought leaders and or pathfinders or pioneers of knowledge in a variety of domains. What they do is they first of all make sure they are not grounded in an absent unconscious. They are propelled, you are propelled, as you shared with me, by certain permanent inquiries, what I call permanent line inquiries, to a point that they are seeded and cultivated so deeply in your unconscious so that they deliver the next yield, the next download sometime when you are list searching. You may be watching a movie, you may be talking with a friend, bang, because there is actually an active inquiry, the induction occurs. So in that sense, what I'm proposing here, we ought to recognize the unconscious as the semi-permeable induction space where from we draw energy and direction, and these below the line represent induction from below, And by the way, I'm going to qualify it in a minute, because below doesn't mean there isn't important developmental material here. These are inductions from below. These represent the induction from above. Above to mean the greater, vaster potential range of human development, of human evolution, of human intelligence. Below to mean the unworked, unresolved, unprocessed material, individually and collectively, that becomes a blockage until such time as we find a way to reintegrate it and own it, and thereby cleanse or become dialectic on it such that it can be reintegrated to be part of the above the line. That's the specifically comment about the subconscious. And then if you begin to look at the lines of work that they each offer, it will, for example, suggest that when we talk about the subconscious, these are the areas where we need to do the shadow work to become forensic. Where do I have a blind spot? Where have I disowned or shunned a part of myself, or a part of the bigger picture, because of which, by the way, I myself becomes more brittle? Because typically what we disown carries some of the immunity we need, if we can find a way to become dialectic on it, dialectic inside and with others. And then some of the work that needs to be done at these realms, and there are many modalities, this is just placeholder, all that is to do with trauma work and all that is to do with healing work. So these are some of the lines of work to be addressed to the subconscious, unconscious, the suppressed and disowned material. The lines of work was just starter placeholder. There is when one finds oneself wandering aimlessly, rudderlessly, and therefore being exposed to the risk of all those things. Classic current example is young people that early in the day come on Facebook to only discover that 3, 4, 5 hours later that they disappeared. They were completely unconscious for 3 or 4 hours looking at what other people, their friends, are doing on Facebook, and becoming increasingly depressed why other people have such wonderfully colorful lives, which they perceive through the lies that other people advertise on their feed, and to only wake up 4 or 5 years, sometimes years as well, but 4 or 5 hours later, to discover that they were unconscious, literally unconscious at that time. So that's where you bring practices of self-awareness. That's where you bring practices of direction finding, where a person begins to practice, what will I have in my life as the center of my attention and focus? What will I not have? Which feelings, which qualities, which experiences do I want to support in myself because I find that they are nourishing? And which are the experiences and the environments and the people that I find that are not nourishing for me and for my growth and my development? And I will, to the degree of my ability, minimize my exposure there. Certainly, purpose discovery work. I used to do a lot of that work when I started working in the corporate arena in the late 90s, early 2000s. I used to take teams on a 5-day purpose discovery journey, and they were articulating their core values and their core passion and purpose. And certainly many aspects of development work, all part of, so how do you transform an absent unconscious into a present or a presence-full unconscious? In essence, such that your unconscious can work for you and help you lead, as against you become a victim of what's in your unconscious, because your unconscious hijacked your higher intentions. Maybe because you were not clear, perhaps because you didn't engage in the practices that will allow you to center yourself with efficacy on what matters most to you. So, and then the recognition that there are starter connective practices and advanced connective practices. And we can spend several weeks just unpacking these. But these slides I just created this morning, we didn't have it yesterday in the meeting. What I did create for the meeting yesterday, which was offered, was this slide. And we didn't have a lot of time. So I said to, in the moment, my question was, choose two of these. This is a loom. So you and I have spoken about looms for a while. This was a loom that was developed. And a question from Claire, who asked me this question, or the question to her was, select two of these and we'll spend some time with them. But I'm just curious if first, actually, let me do this. Let me return to the previous slide. Is there anything you'd say here in the first place about this? Because this is the first time I'm talking about it. This is a draft that literally emerged an hour before our call.
Well, thank you for sharing it and for being so exquisitely prepared. I love what I see. It definitely sounds the right tones for me. And having a visual such as this makes the decision clear. It illuminates that there's a choice. Now, granted, we're talking about unconscious dynamics, but we can consciously choose to work with our being in ways that transform and transmute that which is below the line. And I don't know if there's a kind of sublimation process where that same energy now is able to function above the line, or whether it's more of a relative energizing of these higher capacities and de-energizing the lower capacities. I suspect it's some kind of upliftment where really all of the energy becomes available and all of the circuitry of consciousness becomes more available. And maybe in the infinite, there's always more. So I want to be mindful of not over speaking. And I also love how this leads into the slide you did present. I'm very intrigued by the practices, which I know we'll come to, that
let me just stay there with what you offered about this, because the point you made is just so critical, a distinction you made. The monkey inside that lives here in the absent unconscious and the subconscious wants to be included. And when we don't include that little monkey inside, it hijacks the proceedings. So we become disassembled and discombobulated because the monkey will do that to us. But so the point you made, exactly right. That's the way I appreciate it. This is where we use our conscious awareness to work for us to engage the greater, more potent, more inclusive, broader in range unconscious. So the conscious seeds and facilitates that space. And so therefore what we're literally saying is that consciousness, we can look at consciousness as a gradient of potential. When Mozart was composing his music, his consciousness was in the divine part of himself, where he was in communion with the higher source from which he was with which he was composing the music. When he then departs from that, and he is in the asshole part of himself, or the monkey part of himself, he is a disaster. The realization, the bottom line, because we are each a product of evolution, we each have the entire bar. One way to think of a development journey is we are practicing increasingly the capacity to become directive, to guide, to facilitate the conscious part of ourselves, to learn to surrender to the higher unconscious that becomes available when we connect with those potentials that we call here the intelligence streams. So I didn't want to lose the distinction you offered there, that it's the conscious part that works for you in service of the unconscious.
Beautiful. And I have to wonder about the word superconscious.
So, so one of the options was to write here super. Initially, I wrote here super unconscious, but it really is becoming super conscious. So I agree with you. Perhaps the better name here is the super conscious. I didn't write it because I wanted to highlight that this is still an unconscious space. Why super conscious perhaps is right is once you are active in that space, here is the important thing, you become semi or unconscious to the local planetary you, because you're in service. You have this beautiful scene in the Amadeus movie where his wife is coming through the door screaming at him, and he is, they got the script right there. Her screams become part of, he's no longer hearing. I mean, he's departing from what he needs to attend to, which is his family. But going along with the metaphor, he is actually transmuting, transmogrifying, transforming the chaotic noise around him to become unconscious to the noise around him, so that he becomes superconscious to the melodic composition that is transcending with him.
That's a perfect illustration. And I would love to dive into the superconscious more, perhaps in another conversation. And it seems to me the practices that you're outlining or identifying can move us in that direction.
I think you are. Are you proposing that we do some of it now, or are you proposing that we do it another time?
Oh, I guess I'm flirting with the idea. So shifting into a more functional unconscious with the starter technologies, and then the advanced technologies. In my own experience, they do open up, well, in some sense, superpowers, at least powers that we're not as used to working with. Superpowers of listening, of intuiting, of really sensing the movements of life. And yeah, I suppose when we're engrossed at that level, we're less aware at others. So that's a really good and helpful distinction. So maybe you could say a bit about the starter technologies and the advanced technologies and where they lead.
Would you like me to focus on anyone specific, or would you like me to try to play simultaneous chess and go box by box and try and offer a paragraph? The risk in doing that is shrinking too much the significance and the potential of each of the boxes.
Well, there is one that stands out to me. Okay. I'm inclined to have the survey experience, but the mental bungee jump, for some reason, that leapt out when I first saw this diagram, and it continues to kind of shimmy in my awareness.
Interesting. Of all the boxes here, that's the one I've actually integrated and is written of in the book I've written a few years ago, Create New Futures. And this is something that emerged in my business experience as a consultant. The backstory for it, Jeff, is that when I was in my 20s, I was exposed by a very dear and special teacher to a simple idea that I decided to take to heart. And he said, if you orient your system, if you practice in your system the idea of collecting many, many examples, perhaps 3,000 examples, one of the starter technologies, of how dualities and polarities show up in this planetary theater. If you collect many, many examples of the law of 3 octaves, how everything you look at has this idea of body, mind, and spirit. I know you could say mind and spirit and soul. You could outline different ways of those triadic formations. You could certainly talk about past and present and future, and conscious and semi-conscious and unconscious. If you collected many, many examples of these, what you will actually be doing is you will be building, seeding your unconscious with the core patterns of how the universe works. And a bit like the way of the juggler in the circus, where if you've seen, and they spin many plates, and once they spin a plate, the plate can spin there and hold, and he can go and spin the next plate, and he can go and spin the third and the fourth plate. So you could literally get activated in yourself in many different systems, because you will see that you have 5 fingers, and you have 5 senses, and 5 extensions to your body. So you are yourself a radio set that has these 5 extensions to it. And you then go and discover the many other 5s, and you research the 4 and the 4 seasons and the 4 elements and 4 steps, or the 4 stages of a cycle, and the 4 chambers, 4 parts of the heart, and 4 parts of the 4 phases of the bloodstream. And you'd find many, many 4s. And the more you do these things, you will be activating in yourself something that is not based on the teaching of any human being or any philosophy or any theology. You will literally be printing in yourself the working mechanism, the anatomy of the natural principles of how the world works. Because how this world works is it works by complying with these laws. The seasons are there forever. The elements are there forever. I've done that for many years. So when I moved to work in the business arena, I knew that I needed to impose upon my subconscious mind an impossibility. I needed to put myself in a position that I'll experience my back to the wall. I don't recommend it as a strategy for every person, but I essentially said, you will use the mental bungee jump to catalyze in yourself the accelerated production, the accelerated product of what, because I waited many years before I moved into the consulting business arena, and now I needed to, in 10 years, do the financial journey of 20 years. And the mental bungee jump was one of the accelerating technologies. So over the last 20 years, I've been to hundreds of situations where I'll be either on a coaching phone with conversation with a client, or literally be in a room with a group of 12 or 16 or 20 executives. And there is a conversation, and somebody would raise an issue or a concern or a problem. And I would hear myself say, now the unconscious is leading. This is why the unconscious is leading. I will hear myself say, well, there are 3 vectors or 3 levels to the concern you raised, or there are 4 dimensions to this challenge, or there are 5 facets to this opportunity, or there are 7 subplot lines to this inquiry, strategic inquiry. And literally, I would say that, and because I said that, I actually produced a promise that I'm about to deliver something I have no idea at that point in time when I make the declaration. That's me making a mental bungee jump, coming out of the deep appreciation that my unconscious is so much smarter than I am, so much more intelligent than I am consciously. And if I put upon it the charge, not always, sometimes I'll fall on my face, but when I'm with a team of executives and they just so happen to be that they also wrote a nice large check for me to be there, I better deliver, because what's on the line is more than not even losing face, but really my credibility is on the line and my contractual arrangement. And so I say that, and I literally walk the 4 or 5 steps to the flip chart or the board, and I draw the 3 boxes or the 4 boxes or the 7 boxes, and I'll give them names. And this is what I shared with you on another conversation, is the loom practice. So I've now created hundreds of frameworks and looms over the last 20 years, maybe 5, maybe 6, maybe 700. I would say somewhere between 10 to 15% of those were harvested as part of the ongoing practice. Some I come back to here and there. Many were simply purely a situational framing that appeared that was relevant for this situation. So the 4 levels of listening appeared as a result of a bungee jump that in the meantime evolved to be the 5th and the 6th level of listening. That's the domain listening box next to it. The 4 stages of adult learning appeared in this way. The 3 propulsions of great companies appeared in this way. And so much more that is part of my core consulting practice. I essentially launched a mental bungee jump, which was a command instruction to the unconscious to release me out of the pain of hitting the ground and actually catch me in the last minute with the cord, with the tethered power of the unconscious. So, yeah, that's interesting that you selected that. That's the most extreme example here, and one I don't necessarily recommend that is the best possible way to do this. I just had so much I needed to do in such a short time, so I selected to develop the mental bungee jump technology.
Beautiful. It is one that I can relate to in my experience working and consulting. There have been numerous occasions that pretty much map to the description that you've given. And I've known in the moment, something in me knew the information was there. And for it to come up into awareness, a situation was needed that applied the appropriate pressure and incentive.
There is a very important realization inherent in this. So, and this is where I'm going to reveal a little bit more the deeper causation that leads me, the deeper inquiry. Part of the exhilaration of engaging this practice, and the reason to engage this practice for me, is not necessarily to impress other people that I'm so whatever, even though it helps when you are producing and needing to lead a consulting, strategic, innovation practice in the world of business. But there is a deeper impulse in this for me. The deeper impulse is not based in the egoic self. It's not based in showing myself or somebody else that I'm brilliant. It's not about that, because frankly speaking, most of those models, after they emerged in the moment, could be refined and continue to be refined when I get to it. So I've always recognized these were drafts. But the deeper impulse, and this to me is circling back to the deeper inquiry about leading with the unconscious, is the recognition that the change that we described, the rolling event that is underway, Jeff, the kind of crises that we are now seeing on the world stage, they require our higher capabilities and talents. If we are to solve very complex problems, we will need to make nonlinear exponential leaps. To make nonlinear exponential leaps, we will need to individually and collectively engage the unconscious. It already contains or shall we say here, the super conscious, where the answers and the solutions and the innovations for the individual and the collective and the global and perhaps the galactic problems that are facing humanity, they're all latent there. I see myself still as a beginner practitioner in these spaces, and the joy and the propulsion is to engage and do the mental bungee jump, to engage the broader capacity that's available for us. Why do it? To discover that the system is more brilliant than I am. It's not about the discovery that I'm brilliant. It's about discovering that we humans are participant in a system that's more brilliant than us when we are prepared to do the hard work, the preparatory work. So for me, the mental bungee jump is a leap of faith. It's a leap of faith in the human design and the causing realms, the intelligent realms, the realms of intelligence that we are endowed with and beneficiaries of, and that part of our job, we didn't talk about, I will just quickly, I know we are landing, we didn't talk about removing inhibitors within and preventers without. This is a big conversation for us to develop some time. Part of me taking the mental bungee jump is I remove inhibitors within, including the preparedness that I'll embarrass myself sometimes. All right, it's not the end of the world. I can actually embarrass myself and pick myself up and create a better draft. Curiously, the more relaxed you are about embarrassing yourself, the less likelihood that you will embarrass yourself. And by the way, when you embarrass yourself, guess what? It becomes in service of the whole, because it allows other people to feel safe and relaxed we're actually doing this in practice and as a discovery journey. And so, but that is the deeper excitement in this for me. The deeper excitement and release is not discover how brilliant we are, discover how filled with brilliance are the realms we can associate with, and that when we come inside a collective, there is more of what becomes available that joins us in the process. So that's the short version about the mental bungee jump.
Great. Well, and also perhaps a key characteristic of your work overall, which is creating the conditions for groups to gather for collective intelligence and wisdom and collective unconscious brilliance to manifest. And so I wonder if the collective mental bungee jump is something that would be good to share widely and giving ourselves permission to take the leap right now. There's never been a better time. And recognizing that life is a rolling event. These times are a rolling event of particular import, and it's iterative. Therefore, if if something doesn't go as planned, maybe it's not an embarrassment, it's learning as a byproduct of the emergence process. And in weaving all of these threads a little bit, I am appreciating ever more fully the work that you have developed over these however many years now since you took your initial leap into consulting at a high level. So thank you for sharing today so richly.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeff, and to be continued in this research.
Yes.
And to be discovered as we plod along. We are about to embark on a new next year, 2021, and it will bring many opportunities for us to practice, to engage in these practices and others.